Hi, everybody. Welcome to Friends Talk Money. I'm Pam Krueger, co-host of Money Track on public television and founder of WealthRamp.com.
I'm Richard Eisenberg, a personal finance writer and editor, and formerly the editor of the Money and Work channels for the PBS site for people over 50, nextavenue.org.
And I'm Terry Savage, nationally syndicated personal finance columnist and the author of The Savage Truth on Money.
We're three friends who like to talk money and all the issues that come with it.
On this podcast, we're trying to help you understand your personal finances
to get you and your retirement on the right path for true financial peace of mind.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Friends Talk Money. We want to talk about college today. No, we don't think you're going to college, but we suspect that many of your children, and especially your grandchildren, might be going to college down the road. And you might be thinking about the best way to help the family save for money for college. A lot of you in the olden days had Uniform Gift to Minors Act for children, but we want to talk to you about some of the great new features of 529 college savings plans, which are by far the better way to save for college. We're going to have an expert joining us in just a moment, but today we want to focus on the kinds of things you should know as a grandparent, perhaps, about how to open and contribute to and save for college using a 529 plan. So here's some background. A few basic facts. In a 529 college savings plan, all the money you contribute grows tax-free and it can be used for almost every single college expense. It can be used for any college in any state. There's no discount if you use your state's plan. And I'll explain how that works, but once you get into the plan, you don't have to be an investment genius. In fact, probably what you're going to do is let them invest for you using what they call the age-based plan. If your grandchild is just an infant or 3 years old or 5 years old, they'll adjust the investments accordingly. And by the way, the money can be used for any child in the family. So if one gets a football scholarship or a merit scholarship, another child in the family can use the money. Now, the reason for a 529 plan as opposed to an UTMA or UGMA account is that money in a 529 plan counts minimally against the family and financial aid formulas, while money in one of those custodial accounts weighs 7 times more heavily against the family when they're asking for financial aid. How much can you give? Well, let's just see how generous you are as a grandparent. Of course, each of you can give this year, $17,000 annual gift tax exclusion and put it in a 529 plan. So together you could make a big jump for just in 1 year. But you're also even allowed to combine 5 years of the annual gift tax exclusion, $85,000 each of you, to put it in little grandchild's college savings account. That should certainly do it. But don't think this is just for rich people. Most plans will let you open an account with as little as $500 or $1,000. And then every year on birthdays, you want to give toys, but they're going to be broken. You want to give clothes, they're going to be outgrown. At the same time, you can at any time just add a contribution. Now, who should be the custodian of the plan? Now it should be you, the grandparent. But we'll talk more about that with our expert, who we're going to introduce in just a moment. Our expert is Mark Kantrowitz. He is the acknowledged expert. He writes for savingforcollege.com and he writes for Forbes. He knows everything, welcome, Mark, about saving for college, and also additionally some interesting things about student loans. So Mark, we're glad to have you. I just did a primer on 529 plans, but could I ask you a different question to lead off? Maybe it's a little out of tune. But we just got word that in the last week or so that the debt deal included a provision that said student loan repayments. After 3 years, both political parties put a moratorium not only on repaying loans, but on adding interest to them. Student loan repayments will start again September 1st. The moratorium ends August 30th. So is that going to be a big drag for people? What should everybody who's already got a student loan know about now?
Well, and borrowers haven't had to make any payments on their student loans for 42 months. So out of sight, out of mind. Some people will forget that they had student loans. So I'm expecting a little bit of chaos with the restart of repayment. the Biden administration was already planning on restarting repayment in September. So there's going to be a 60-day period during which borrowers will receive at least a half dozen notices of the restart of repayment. And some people may miss the first payment because that's not uncommon when people graduate at the end of the 6 month grace period for them to be late with that payment. But things should settle down within a few months.
Now, what if you've moved, or what if you can't even? I mean, it's entirely possible people can't even remember what their student loans are or who their servicer is. And some of the servicers changed last year as well. What advice for dealing with that?
Yeah, and several of the servicers have changed, so borrowers may not know who their current servicer is, but they can find that out on studentaid.gov. The first thing I would suggest they do is they update their contact information on studentaid.gov, and if they know their loan servicer, with their loan servicer as well, so that they'll get those 6 notices of the restart of repayment. In addition, I would recommend that they sign up for autopay, where their monthly payment is automatically transferred from their bank account to the loan servicer, so they're less likely to be late with a payment. And if they're struggling financially and won't be able to make their payments when the payment pause and interest waiver ends, they can continue a personal pause through a deferment, such as the economic hardship deferment or unemployment deferment, or through a general forbearance. And also the income-driven repayment plans can have a 0 monthly payment if you're earning less than 150% of the poverty line.
Mark,
Interest may continue to accrue, though.
Mark, I'm so happy to have you on today with us, and it's just a pleasure and I'm so grateful you could join us. You actually took. I'm glad we're thinking the same way, because I was going to say the exact same thing. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's been 3 years, right? And all I was going to suggest is that along those lines, what I've seen in the past is, when people just get delinquent just enough, it does ding your credit report. So, finding out who's servicing your student loan, reaching out to them, getting that auto pay going, and then just making sure that, you don't get surprised after the fact to find out that something dinged your credit score, because the last thing you want right now in an environment of higher interest rates is a lower credit score. And Mark, I was going to say, this is kind of confusing, and I don't want to get the things confused that are in the news, but keeping in mind that the repayments that start August 30th is a completely different plan than the Biden student loan forgiveness that would allow 45 million people to actually cancel their debt. Two entirely
Not
different.
all, but $10,000 or $20,000, depending on the loan. Mark, let's talk about that. We still, at this taping, and we're going to get this podcast up right away, have not heard the Supreme Court decision. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the Supreme Court is expected to issue a decision by the end of this month. They've been issuing opinions on Thursdays. So maybe tomorrow we'll hear about it, or the week after, or the week after that. And then they're expected to issue a decision. There are 2 main issues. One is whether the plaintiffs have legal standing to file the lawsuit. And if they have legal standing, then the court can evaluate it on the merits. With regard to legal standing, there's this notion of third-party standing, where can Missouri file a lawsuit on behalf of Mohila, even though Mohila didn't file a lawsuit themselves? And the other issue is major questions doctrine with regard to the merits. And this is going to cost the federal government $400 billion or so. Can the Biden administration do that entirely on its own, or do they need to have Congress pass a law?
One more thing about this. The Biden administration does have a backup plan. Richard, I'm coming to you next, I know, but I just want to wrap this in a neat ball. They do have a backup plan in case this is thrown out by the Supreme Court. They do have a way to expand the income levels for these income-based repayment plans, making more people qualify for a reduced payment based on their income. So I know that's in the background. Is it too late right now? Because a lot of people are saying, yeah, tell me more about the income-based repayment plan. especially since everything's starting up quickly. Well, how do you go about getting an income-based repayment plan?
Okay, you can choose an income-driven repayment plan through your loan servicer or on studentaid.gov. The new regulations that are pending will go into effect July 1, 2024 as a modification to the repay plan, REPAYE, and that will increase the threshold from 150% of the poverty line to 225% of the poverty line.
So help us on the way. Richard, I'm gonna let you jump in on any basis and then let's do
Thanks.
529 plans, but anything more about this whole student loan thing? I
Yeah,
worry
yeah.
that it's gonna stall the economy out when people suddenly realize they got to
Yeah.
start paying.
Thanks for being here, Mark. I want to go back to where we started, and that's about the waivers that people have had for a few years now, and also the studentaid.gov site. I understand that there's a part on the site called the Loan Simulator Plan Tool that people may be able to use to sort of figure out the right kind of loan for them. Can you talk a little bit about that and who might want to use it?
Well, I don't particularly like that tool because it makes some bad assumptions concerning the repayment term, but it lets you calculate what your monthly payment will be under each of the various repayment plans. Standard 10-year repayment, extended repayment, 25 years. There's also a version that has 10, 12, 15, 20, 25, or 30 years. If you consolidate your loans, there's graduated repayment where the payments start off low and increase every 2 years. And then there are 4 income-driven repayment plans. So a total, including these and a few others, of a dozen different repayment plans, which makes it difficult for families to choose. For most people, it's either going to be standard 10-year repayment, extended repayment if they're a parent with Parent Plus loans, or one of the income-driven repayment plans if they're a student. Parents generally are not eligible for the income-driven repayment plans unless they consolidate their Parent Plus loans and then use the income contingent repayment plan.
Yeah, this is
Thanks.
complex. Studentaid.gov, the place where you check the federal student loan database. You have your loan number, you have a student loan number to get into that. Not anybody can go on and look at your nephew's student loan outstanding. And then those repayment plans. And that's a good point about the Parent Plus loans. You know, if you have a non-working spouse who took out those student loans, you might be able to deal with an income contingent repayment plan that could lower. Am I wrong? But parent, as we transition into how to save for college, if you haven't saved, you've got some bad choices. There's federal student loans. Parent Plus loans sound like they're just a gift to parents, but they are the most expensive form of student loan you could possibly take out. Explain so we can warn people off that have kids going this fall.
Well, the interest rates for new loans this fall are 5.5% roughly for undergraduate students, a little bit over 7% for graduate students. And then there's the plus loan, both Parent Plus and Grad Plus loan, which is about 8%. And the fees are also higher. 1% for the student loans, roughly, it's a little bit higher, about 1.25%, and about 4% for the Parent Plus loans. So they are much more expensive, but they may be a reasonable alternative for someone who needs to borrow more. But I would caution families that if they need to borrow parent loans or private loans, they may be borrowing too much money. If your total debt at graduation is less than your annual starting salary, you can afford to repay your loans in 10 years or less. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to make those loan payments, and you'll need extended repayment or income-driven repayment to afford those monthly payments. But the longer repayment term, while yielding a lower monthly payment, also increases the total interest you pay over the life of the loan.
That's a killer. And then we have family, you know, young people who can't start families, buy homes because when they'll see it again when the burden of repayments resumes. Say that again. At graduation, you want your total debt. What? Say that part again.
Right. Total debt should be less than annual income. That's a reasonable amount of debt that you can afford to repay in 10 years or less. Otherwise, you're going to struggle.
So if your daughter is studying, liberal arts or whatever it is, and can only get a job in the PR business, paying $47,000 a year in Chicago or $52,000 in New York or whatever, and has $100,000 worth of student loan debt, bad investment.
Yes, very bad.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're in medical school or if you're in law school, maybe I'm not as worried about you. But, if I have a grandchild or if I have a niece or a nephew and, and I'm going to give, or I'm a parent, I want to be looking at that. It's really, that's a really good metric.
Although
Yeah,
I have to say that sounds easier to say than it is to do, because the cost of college at private universities these days can often be $50,000 a year, and very few students graduating from college with undergraduate degrees are going to be making that or much more than that. It's very easy for many of them to need to take out $100,000 in student loans. So I guess I'm wondering, how can they really do it with the rule that you're setting for them?
Well, they don't have to go to a private college. They could go to an in-state public college, which will cost a third to a half as much.
But some do.
So, yeah, now if you can you may want to drive a Lexus, but all you can afford to drive is a Yaris. That doesn't mean you should go into
What?
debt up to your eyebrows to pay for a luxury vehicle.
Mark, you read Ron Lieber's book, The Price You Pay for College. I wrote
Yes.
about it. But it's not so much about how to get loans and so forth. It's to, when your kid's a freshman or sophomore, or your grandchild, to talk to the parents. It is not being the world's best parent to get your child into the most prestigious school and then saddle him or her and yourself in your retirement with an unconscious amount of student loan debt.
Well, there are about 6 dozen colleges that have these no loans financial aid policies, and that includes the entire Ivy League, where they replace the loans with grants in your financial aid package, though they tend to have and they have a net price that assumes that the student is going to be working during the summer, a minimum student contribution. But and they're still, and they end up having a net price that's similar to an in-state public college, but the problem is they're much harder to get into.
Yeah, how realistic is that? Yeah.
Okay. Hey, one more thing. Let me ask you before we move to 529 plans, Mark, what would be your 3 favorite websites that you would send if you have a high school sophomore, or you want to talk to your kids before your adult children, before your grandchildren get to college when they're 8 or 9 or 10? What 3 websites would you send people to just get into this understanding of all that you know?
Well, and I would suggest, studentaid.gov has good background information about federal student aid, so that's a good resource. Fastweb.com is a free scholarship matching service. You shouldn't wait until the spring of the senior year in high school to start searching for scholarships. There are many that you can win in younger grades, and you should continue after the student's already in college. And the College Board, they have their Big Future Scholarship website, as well as good information about planning and paying for college.
What was the third? I overspoke you. I'm sorry.
All right. So fastweb.com, fastweb.com is a free scholarship matching website, and they also have good information about planning and paying for college. There is the College Board has their Big Future website. I've also been writing for the College Investor website, so they have a little bit more technical and depth articles about different aspects of planning and paying for college. And as you mentioned, savingforcollege.com, they also have information not just about 529 plans, but also student loans and similar topics.
It's always
We
the one.
promised to put all those up on our website, friendstalkmoney.org. But now let's move on, can we, to 529 plans. What do you want to tell grandparents about 529 plans? When, how, where, which, who should be the custodian? Give us the rundown, Mark.
Okay, the sooner you start saving for college, the better off you'll be. If you start saving at birth, about a third of your college savings goal will come from the earnings. If you wait until the child enters high school, less than 10% will come from the earnings, and you'll need to save about 6 times as much per month to reach the same college savings goal. I recommend using a direct sold 529 plan. These are offered by almost all the states. The trade-offs that you will consider are, what are the fees that they charge, and does your state offer a state income tax break? Sometimes the state income tax break can compensate for lower fees. You can have three main types of 529 plans. One where the parent is the account owner, the grandparent can contribute to that one. Another where the student is both the beneficiary and the account owner. It's called a custodial 529 plan account. And the grandparent could be the custodian of that. I know some grandparents have set these up, kept them secret from the family until the child's about to apply for
Gotcha.
college and then say,
Like
surprise,
that
we
idea.
saved this money. And then finally, the grandparent could be the account owner. Now, there's a key benefit now soon of grandparent-owned 529 plans, which is that they will no longer have any impact on eligibility for need-based financial aid. Currently, if it's a student or parent-owned 529 plan, it's reported as a parent asset on the free application for federal student aid or FAFSA form, and that reduces aid eligibility by as much as 5.64% of the asset value. Qualified distributions from a parent or student-owned 529 plan have no impact on aid eligibility. With the grandparent-owned 529 plans, it's not reported as an asset on the FAFSA, and starting in 2024-25, the qualified distributions will not be reported as income on the FAFSA either. So long as you take qualified distributions, it should have no impact on aid eligibility.
Stop right there for a minute. What is every grandparent went, wait, what? So how do I'm a grandparent. What should the title read on this 529 account?
Well, it's not titling per se. It is the form that you use to open it is going to ask who's the account owner and who's the beneficiary. It may also ask about contingent account owners. So if the account owner dies and or becomes disabled, who replaces them?
All right, Grandma and little Billy, what do you want to have it say so that it stays out of the financial aid calculations down the road?
So grandma or grandpa will be the account owner. You can only have one of them be the account owner. And little Billy will be the beneficiary.
Period.
Period.
That's the way we want to read. Now I want to go back one more thing. Look, will you take a step back? You said direct sold plan. Now, your financial planner, your broker says, yeah, well, I'll help you set up a plan, Grandma Smith, for little Billy. Why do you not want to do it that way?
Okay, because if you use an advisor sold plan, there are commissions that you're paying, which can be as high as 5% or more, and the annual fees could be much higher. Now, the argument is that they manage it actively and yield a better return on investment. But the key to maximizing net returns is minimizing costs. If you use a direct sold plan, they have lower fees, and your net return on investment after the fees will be greater than on an advisor sold 529 plan.
Now, people are saying, but wait, how do I find it? So can we do a commercial here for savingforcollege.com?
Well, savingforcollege.com has links to every single state 529 plan, both direct sold and advisor sold. And they have information that let you explore the details, like what are the fees, what are the state income tax breaks, so that you can decide whether or not you want to use your state's plan or another plan that has lower fees. And then you can click over to the state's 529 plan and you set it up online. It's very easy. Shouldn't take more than about half an hour.
Okay. Good. Well, Richard, you have a question, and I know I have a question too.
Okay, thanks. I've got one general question and one specific question, and I'll do them fast. The general question is, Mark, are there any state 529 plans that you think are better than the other ones in terms of either their investment choices or their fees or customer service or anything about them? If I can choose between all 50, would you point me towards any of them over any others?
Well, I would suggest using the data on savingforcollege.com to pick out the one that's best for you, because it really has to be specific to your financial circumstances, like where you live. But in general, you don't need to have a ton of investment options. All you need are two main investment options: a large cap mutual fund, like an S&P 500 fund or a total stock market fund, and a low risk investment option, such as some of them offer bank CDs, Some of them have money market accounts, but you don't want to be in a bond fund because those aren't doing very well right now. But what you do is you mix the two. You have a percentage in stocks and a percentage in low risk, and you change that over time as college approaches to reduce your risk of loss and to lock in your gains. Now, many of these 529 plans will have and what's called an age-based asset allocation or enrollment date asset allocation, which does this automatically, shifting you from one mix to another over time. And the thing to check is, what is the low risk option? Is it bonds or is it just CDs and money market accounts? The other thing to check is, what are the percentages that it starts with? Does it start with 100% equities or does it start with 70%? That can make a big difference on your net returns in the end. And does it bottom out at 20% stocks, 30% stocks, 5% stocks? You don't want to go too low because that affects your returns. So it's partly a personal decision, but also partly, just figuring out what options you have. Some of them have 3 different age-based asset allocations: conservative, moderate, and aggressive.
Thank you. Now, here's
Good.
my specific question. Comes out of personal life experience, but I think it's true for some other people too, some other grandparents. So I've got 2 adult sons. I set up 529 accounts for them when they were born. I put money in them for many years. One of them I used completely. The other one, it turned out I've got some money left over because I didn't need all of it. Now that son is expecting, his wife's expecting a baby. Can I use the account that I had for my son for the new granddaughter? And if so, what should I need to know to make that happen?
Okay, so you can change the beneficiary of a 529 plan to a relative of that beneficiary. So you can change it from your grandchild to uh, a great grandchild. There may be generation skipping transfer taxes, and the IRS is not very clear about what one does, and I mean, who pays them is a key question. There was some draft regulations that never became finalized that would have provided an answer to that. But and you may need to use your annual gift tax exclusion, which is also good for the generation skipping transfer taxes, or your lifetime exclusion in order to take care of that. 529 plans have a special provision called 5-year gift tax averaging, sometimes called super funding, where you can give a lump sum equal to 5 years worth of the annual gift tax exclusion and have it treated as occurring over that 5-year period. So that lets you, when you have a newborn, you could give them 5 years, which is $17,000 per year. So that's $85,000. And each of you could do that. So grandma and grandpa together could give $170,000 as a lump sum, and get them off on a very good foot for their college savings.
Great, thank you.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, before we wrap, I had 2 questions, but actually, Richard, you asked my question about, do you have a favorite state plan? Because I've always heard great things about Utah forever. But the question that I have maybe is more of a financial planning in a way, but Mark, when, if ever, would you recommend withdrawing funds, from an IRA, like a Roth IRA, perhaps to pay for college expenses? Like, just so people who are comparing those 2 opportunities, how would you look at that?
Well, with a Roth IRA, you can take a tax-free return of contributions, but that tax-free return of contributions may be reported as untaxed income on the FAFSA and therefore affect aid eligibility. Now, the FAFSA uses 2-year-old income information, and it's called a prior year. So if the child is going to graduate in 4 years and you wait until January 1st of the sophomore year in college, then there will be no subsequent year's FAFSA to be affected by your taking that tax-free return of contributions from the Roth IRA. Now, there's a new provision that lets you move money from a 529 plan into a Roth IRA. You can roll over up to $35,000 from a 529 plan to a Roth IRA. The Roth IRA has to be in the beneficiary's name. Of course, you can always change that beneficiary from the child to the parent if you wanted. This starts in 2024. Now, the 529 plan has to have been in existence for 15 years, and you can only roll over funds from 5 years ago and before. But it is a new option that addresses the question, do you save for college or do you save for retirement? Now, effectively, you can save for both. And if you have leftover money, you can move it into a retirement plan.
Yeah, it's more of
Yeah.
a financial planning because it could be complex. I mean, you've got to look at the whole picture of what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish for your kids and grandkids. It's more of a planning question. Thanks. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, that's an interesting new feature that was announced this year as the tax bill. It doesn't go into effect yet, but it answers the question, what if my child gets a scholarship and I don't have another child or grandchild? Let me hit you with a couple more little nitty-gritty ones, Mark, and before we let you go. One of them is, all right, I have 3 children. One of them gets a scholarship. How tough is it to move it from that account? Should I open only one account in the name of the eldest child and figure that the parents won't spend it all, or we won't spend it all on the first child? How do you handle that with 3 kids? 3 different accounts? What?
I recommend that each child has their own 529 plan for a couple of reasons. One, you can always change the beneficiary of 529 plan to be the sibling. That's very easy. And so if one child doesn't go to college or they go to a less expensive college and there's leftover money, you can use that for their siblings. Also, the state income tax breaks may be per beneficiary and not per taxpayer, in which case, if you have just one 529 plan, you're going to have not as much of a tax break. And also, what if your children overlap in college? You can only make a distribution to pay for the cost of that beneficiary. So you'd have a 529 plan where you take a distribution and then you'd have to change the beneficiary, and there's a limit to how often you can change the beneficiary of a 529 plan. It becomes very complicated. It's much better to have separate 529 plans for each child. In addition, suppose you're going to take a non-qualified distribution from a 529 plan. That's going to be taxable at the recipient's tax bracket, so either the student or the parent, depending on who you have the check made payable to. If it's paid directly to the college, it's treated as though it were paid to the student. And if you have 529 plans that started at different times, they may have different percentage earnings. And you want to take a non-qualified distribution from the 529 plan that has the lowest percentage earnings, so that the tax hit, which is based on the earnings portion of the distribution, is as small as possible.
Boom. Okay.
Wow, you are a compendium
are
of information.
Yeah, you are the acknowledged expert. Let's just leave you all grandparents with this, Mark. Let's see if we've got this exactly right. What we're going to do is, if you don't know where to go, I live in a state that doesn't have an income tax. So I just called Vanguard and opened up the 529 plan, knowing they have great investment records, very low cost. And you can do this online. Go Vanguard.com or call 1-800-Vanguard or Fidelity. All these major investment firms manage 529 plans. Each state has its own because of the way the tax law was written. Get the application. You've got 3 grandchildren, very easy. Grandma as the owner, beneficiary is little Billy or Susie or Nancy or whoever it might be. Start with a hunk of money up to $17,500 if you're very generous, but start with less. Set up an automatic plan to come out of your checking account every month. Add to it infrequently at birthdays, communion, whatever it is. Put the money in there and let it keep growing. Mark, any last words of advice for those of us who can't imagine how our grandchildren are ever going to pay for college at this rate?
Well, and set up an automatic investment plan where it automatically transfers money from your bank account to the 529 plan account so that you don't have to think to save. That'll increase the amount that you end up saving for your child or grandchild's college education. And the 2 firms that you mentioned, Vanguard and Fidelity, as well as TIAA, they tend to have among the lower fees. So those are good choices.
Yeah.
And tell us one more time, Mark, give that sentence about if you start at the beginning, how much you have to pay versus if you wait. So do that part again.
Right. So if you start saving from birth, about a third of your college savings goal will come from the earnings. If you wait until the child enters high school, it's less than 10%, and you'll have to save 6 times as much per month.
Time is money.
It's the
Thank
same
you,
math
Mark
that we use when we're trying to get young people to open up IRA accounts and get into their 401ks. It's the magic of saving. Oh, Mark, you are incredibly knowledgeable on this topic. This is great. Thank you.
Thanks,
You're
Mark.
welcome. One final thought. It is cheaper to save than to borrow. Whereas every dollar you save will avoid at least $1 worth of loans. Every dollar you borrow will cost about $2 by the time you repay that debt.
Amen. Thank you.
Yep.
Friends Talking Money today. Thanks, Mark, for joining us.
You're welcome.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org. NASA is your partner in keeping you safe and helping you avoid investment frauds. Visit nasa.org and click on the Investor Education tab to learn more.